we look through this Parsha of the week, the Seder, and we discuss focusing on certain aspects in the Seder that would be meaningful to us. Clearly, these things are meaningful in this week, next week, and the previous week. But as we were taught that we have to learn the Parsha of the week, and therefore it is meaningful that we should draw from the Parsha as it comes. The focus that I want to discuss this week, there are 2 points in this Parsha. The very first point is the very name of the Parsha. The name of the Parsha is Re'ei. Re'ei means see. Basically, Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Yidden they should see what he's proposing to them and what he is describing for them. This is not something that he is showing them to see physically. He is only explaining to them, I'm proposing before you a blessing and the opposite of a blessing. And you should know how you should make your choice. And yet, he says, he starts off by saying, Re'ei, you should see. What's so important? First of all, what is the significance of saying you should see? And why is it so important that it should be referred to as something that you see rather than understand and know? We know, physically speaking, that the Re'iyah, sight, is one of the 5 senses. Among the 5 senses, it is the most powerful of the 5. Now, let us discuss briefly the difference between the senses and the other faculties such as thought, seichel, understanding, and feeling. We know that the senses are in a class by themselves. For instance, the Gemara says, the Halacha says, that if someone was deafened, in other words, if someone damaged somebody's hearing to the point where he's completely deaf, then he has to pay a fine. And the fine is assessed on the value of the entire person. In other words, if a person damaged a person, let's say if he hurt his finger, he has to pay him for the value of the finger, what the finger, the value, the usefulness of the finger. If he damaged his hand, he has to pay him for the hand. If he blinded him, he has to pay him for the value of the eyes. And if he caused him deafness, he has to pay him for his entire worth. What's so significant in that, generally in the senses? So the principle of the senses is that this is the only direct connection that we have with the outside world. With our understanding, with our logic, with our seichel, we can figure things out. We can surmise. We can logically induce, it's called induction, induce what is behind a certain phenomenon. But we don't have a direct knowledge of it. Our direct connection to the outside world is through our senses. And it is touch, taste, smell, hearing, and of course sight, which is the king of them all. All of our senses provide us with great assurance. If we touch something, we're quite sure that there is something there. And the same thing with smell. A person can follow a smell and says, oh, there's something smelly, something is not right. I smell a fire, I don't see a fire, nothing is embering, but I'm sure there's a fire because I smell it. And the same thing with taste and hearing and sight. But there is a profound difference, even amongst the senses, between the other four senses, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and the sense of sight. Sight is described in Hasidus as being the most powerful convincer, the most powerful clarifier. Once a person sees something, then this becomes so clear and vivid and real that it can never be doubted. And what is so special about sight? I'm discussing physical sight, and then we will come to understand spiritual sight and come to understand its profound value. All the other four senses, we know the things that we touch because that object that I touched actually affected me. I feel it with my hand, and it affected my sense. So even though it is very convincing and it's very real, but its reality is limited to the fact that I personally experienced it. Which means this is my personal sensation. The concept of sensation means this is my experience. Even though it's my real experience, but it's still my personal experience. Which means it's not connecting me to the reality itself. It is telling me what I'm experiencing. And to that extent, it's very convincing. But it's still not speaking to me, not telling me about the object itself as the object is unto itself, not how it affects me. And therefore, even though that it is convincing, it's convincing only to the extent that I'm experiencing it. This is similar to what we call emotion. I feel a certain thing. So I feel it, and it's real to me, but it's still, the reality is only because of my own experience. It is not connecting me to the reality of the object itself. It is imperative, we can readily understand that it is imperative. Imperative means it's a must. It's, for those who, it's of utmost importance that we recognize that life and the world is real not only because I experience it, but because it's real in itself. When we learn in the Chumash, in the Torah, it says, Breishis Bore Elokim Hashemayim v'Ha'aretz, that God created the world, the heavens and the earth. It means that we know that He created it, not because I see it, but because that's the reality, that's the truth, what the Torah talks about. I don't need proof from my own experience that that's the way it is. This is something which is real in itself, not through any kind of proof. Anything that I know, even through my senses, where the proof is very, very strong, it's still only limited to the fact that I'm experiencing. The only place where we go beyond our own experience and we know reality as it is unto itself is in sight. Because in sight we know the object, we know it very clearly, and we know all its qualities and even the impression that it makes and so forth, without ever touching it, without ever coming in contact with it. In other words, we know it without being personally affected. We know it not by our own impression or our own effect, but because we know the truth of the object itself. That's the power of sight. This is why sight has this power of conviction, which is even stronger than touch. And it leaves a deeper mark on the person in terms of his experience, in terms of his memory, than even touch. Because it's a reality. You cannot argue away anything that a person had seen. That's a question.
How is that different from hearing? Because touch, you come into contact with it, you actually physically touch it. But something that's looking, something spiritual, like sight, this kind of is more, spiritual, so you're not coming in direct contact with it. It is sight. You're not, your head, but it's going into your mind, it's going into your eyes, and it's being processed in you. Still, so what's the difference between, like I understand, maybe spiritually touching, you come into contact with it physically, but all the connections, all these senses that are more spiritual in nature, they're all the same in relation with the other thing.
1 second. You're asking what is the difference between sight and hearing?
Sight is in a league of its own.
Right.
Why? But I'm trying to see why that is different than, say, hearing. And it's not touch, because touch, you actually have to touch it, so it's something you have to come into contact with it.
Hearing. If you hear a hammer, you don't see it. You know there's a hammer banging. You're sure of it. But you're sure of it by the fact that the sound of the hammer has hit your ear, and it doesn't let you sleep. Therefore, you know that it's there. So even there, it is through your personal experience. Except the experience is that of a sound instead of a touch. A sight is you see the object where it is in its own place. The reality of sight is that you see the object just where it is.
Can I add to the question, or?
I'm sorry?
Can I add to the question a little?
Sure.
Okay, I think what
you know
gentleman was asking was what I was also confused about.
Yeah.
It's possible now with sophisticated technology to, by camera use, lighting and so on, to project maybe that cup some distance away, and I would think it's a cup. But it might not be a cup. It might be some real sophisticated technology, whereas if I touch the cup, I will know it's a cup. I think that's what you were asking. No, in other words, touch would seem to have a certain power that no other senses would have. But
in terms of being sensualized, in other words, I have the sense that it's a cup. You can touch something and have a sense that it's there, and it's not even there. Everything with the sophisticated technology, everything can be camouflaged, can be misrepresented. We're not talking about the question of misrepresentation. We're talking about in terms of the reality. A person is convinced beyond being convinced. In other words, this is a conviction that does not come through a process of conviction. Is it or is it not? It is just is, that there is a world around him. That he knows without a process. And that knowledge is through sight. Everything else is through a process. Okay? I'm walking in and I'm touching it. Oh, is there anything there? Oh, it must be this. There is a process there. In other words, it's secondary knowledge. It's through my own experience. Whereas the sight is something which is the primary reality. It's not an answer to a question. It is elimination of the question completely. This is why Chassidus says that light pushes away darkness, eliminates darkness. It's not a combining thing. It pushes away darkness. That's how we see it. The fact that we can see an object without coming in direct contact to it that itself lets us realize of the truth and reality of this object. That I can see it there without even coming in contact with it. It means that the object is true in an absolute sense. Not because it affects me, but because it's there. Because I see that I can see it without being affected whatsoever. Another aspect that we see in sight is that the other four senses can be turned off. Cannot be turned off. In other words, if I touch something, I touch it. There's no way I can touch it and not be touching it. I cannot turn off touch, smell, taste, or hearing. I mean, I can artificially put in earmuffs, but that's not a natural thing. The only sense that I can turn off is sight. And the reason for that is because sight does not require that I be attached to the object. There's absolutely, I can see it and still be completely independent of it. In other words, I see the reality of the object without being personally involved. In Chassidus, as I mentioned briefly before, it's explained that generally speaking, these two senses of ear and shmiya are represented on the higher plane, a more spiritual plane, in terms of the soul faculties with an intellect and emotion. The intellect relates to sight, and emotion relates to hearing. And here too we will see the similar difference. Emotion is a very important part of our faculties, of our makeup. And yet we say, do not allow your emotions to get the better of you. Do not run away with your emotions. Direct them. Be cautious what you allow yourself to get emotional about. Even though it's really your emotion. The reason is that even though it's a true emotion, you really experience it. But you may become emotional about something that's not really real. How many times did we get angry at someone because we misunderstood his remark? And we get really, really emotional about it. This is, so to speak, a minor superficial illustration. But the point that emotion is something which is our own experience is quite clear. And therefore, if we are convinced of something because we become emotional about it, we immediately we are vulnerable, because we may realize, yes, I get emotional about it, I get excited about it, but it's only my excitement. Who knows that it's really true? How can I really follow it? This is my own preference. This is, by the way, one of the fallacies with which the Jews of Eastern Europe prior to the war were being accused of. They were saying, oh, it's all tradition. You heard this whole song, tradition? It comes from there. It's all tradition. It's all how you feel comfortable with that way of life. It's an emotional connection. It's not really real. You don't really see it. You don't really believe it. It's something that you feel comfortable with over thousands of years of habit. In contrast, there is also the intellect. The intellect, this is where we can conceptualize and we can recognize the truth as it is unto itself. This is where we are setting ourselves aside. You heard the term objective intellect. Objective. I have to qualify this a little bit because of the various effects, the various backgrounds that we may have. In the scientific world, the word objective came to mean lifeless, without any kind of a human input, which means objective means something which is corporeal, something that can be shown physically. Okay? We are not talking about that objectivity. That's lifeless. That's an objectivity that denies the presence of a human being. We're talking objectivity within the human being himself. A human being has been endowed by Hashem a faculty where he's able to know the truth in an objective manner, in pure truth, the way it is, not the way he prefers it, not the way he feels about it, but the way he recognizes it. This faculty, this capability of the intellect, this is rooted in the human being. It is rooted in his very soul, in his neshama. In other words, by virtue of the fact that he is alive, which is a soul power, he is able to know what that life stands for. and how we know the world, we view the world from that perspective of being a human being and alive. It takes a lot of pursuing, a lot of learning and thought, but in order to reveal it and to develop it. But the faculty is there, the capability is there. And every one of us has a certain view of reality. As I mentioned before, I always mention, we are living in a world today where it is possible to deny the existence of a soul intellectually, which is no precedent to it. It's a human being consists of just a body with nerves and electrical pulses. So therefore, we have to focus in and understand that life and the life force in the human being is very real. It's not the result of electrical pulses. It's a pure life unto itself. The fact that it also functions in the body is in itself called a miracle. The fact that this spiritual force, this spirit, can connect to the body and function in the body is a miracle. That's why we make a bracha. When we make a bracha, Asher Yotzar, what is the end of the bracha? Roifei chol bosor u'mafli lasos. What's mafli? Mafli lasos, it does wonders, because this whole thing of a combination of a soul, of a ruchnis and gashmis, is in itself a clear and a vivid miracle. Because in fact, this spirit is a real spirit. It's a spirit of the soul. From this soul, we draw this power and this faculty of the intellect, where we're able to see things and to understand things the way our soul would see and understand them. But of course, at a much lower level, at the level where the body can also tolerate it. But this is a real view, a real recognition of the truth. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Yidden, Re'ei, you should always strive to come to the point where you see it. What does it mean? There is a sefer, a holy sefer written by the Rambam, known as the Guide to the Perplexed. Anybody heard it, I'm sure. It's written by the Rambam himself. And what is the Guide to the Perplexed is? What is perplexed? A perplexed person, novuch it's called. His novuch means he's in the dark, he's confused. Because in light you don't get confused. So one is in the dark, he can get confused. Here's a table, here's a chair, I don't understand what they're doing, what is their correlationship, how do they come together? And all of a sudden there is a wall, it's a confusing world. What is it all about? Is there any meaning for the fact that this chair is next to this table, or there isn't? Confused. In the darkness, everything is confusing. And therefore, in order to straighten things out and have a certain perspective, a certain view of the world, we need to approach it philosophically, what's called logical. And this is what the Rambam is doing. He's helping the perplexed find their way through very sharp and profound application of the power of logic, so that they get some kind of a view of a path. But the Rambam himself writes that is not the end of the line. This is only if one is in the dark never, who got confused, and therefore he has to find his way. But ultimately, we are not in the dark. We don't need to be in the dark, and we don't need to be perplexed. Because we can see things in light, and there all the questions fall away to begin with. Because when you see a chair next to a table, you know exactly what it represents, without any logic, without any proof. You see the reality of it to start with. And the same thing goes about the reality of the world, that with our faculty of the seichel, of the intellect, as the Rambam writes right in the beginning of the Rambam, the big sefer of the Rambam, he actually, in a certain sense, paraphrases the pasuk, the first pasuk in the Torah. He says, "Breishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es ha'aretz." In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the Rambam says that you should know that the beginning and the basis of all intellect, the Yesod HaYesod HaMedach Chochmos, is to know that there is a first being who creates everything. And this is the beginning of wisdom. In other words, it's not something that we find out through logic, through proofs. This is something that we have a knowledge, a direct knowledge of. And everything else, and all wisdom is built upon this knowledge. Because this knowledge is what tells us that this world contains wisdom. It was a creation. And therefore it contains wisdom. Let me understand what's behind this wisdom, what's going on in it. And we are instructed here in this passage that, as I said, we should strive to open up and to find that vision, that clarity, that is beyond question, not based on logic, not based on proofs, but based on we're coming straight from our direct knowledge of the truth, from our own self. In effect, this is really imperative, so to speak, and this is really the principle of our Torah. The Rambam writes elsewhere, if it's true, I believe, the Rambam writes the following: that Moshe Rabbeinu, and all Yidden accepted Moshe Rabbeinu as the prophet. Moshe Rabbeinu is giving us the Torah, and the Torah is actually referred to, it has Moshe Rabbeinu's authorship. Torah's Moshe is called, the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, because he was the prophet that gave us a Torah. So says the Rambam, Moshe Rabbeinu came back to Eden and he did all kinds of miracles, which proved the truth of his being a Navi, or being a prophet. Starting of the miracles that took place in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, all the way down to the exodus from Mitzrayim, and then to Kriyas Yamsuf, and all the various, and the Mon, all the various miracles that Moshe Rabbeinu did. That should be enough to prove to the Yidden that Moshe Rabbeinu is a true prophet, and that he represents the true God. Says the Rambam that the Yidden believed in Moshe Rabbeinu not because of all the miracles. And the Rambam explains, because if someone believes in something because he has proof of its truth, like a miracle, there's a certain amount of uncertainty remaining. Because he says, I need proof for it. I have proof. But the very fact that I need proof means already that this is not a first-hand knowledge or direct knowledge. This is something which I'm acquiring, something external to my own primary knowledge. A person doesn't need proof that he exists. He doesn't need proof that he's alive. But he needs proof that something else. That means that this other thing is something separate. It's not something that is primary knowledge. And therefore the Rambam concludes and says that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Yidden believed in Moshe because they were standing on Har Sinai and they saw Hashem came down on Har Sinai. However we can imagine this, understand it, but that's what the Torah says. Hashem spoke to Moshe. Directly they heard how Hashem speaks to Moshe. They were personal witnesses, eyewitnesses to this phenomenon. How they survived this phenomenon and all that, the Gemara speaks about it, but this is what happened. It says that every word that Hashem said, their neshamas flew out. Then they were restored. In other words, to survive such a phenomenon, such an experience is almost impossible. But they nevertheless saw it, and it was imprinted in the Jewish soul that this is the reality. So here is a very important lesson for us. Moshe Rabbeinu has performed numerous miracles. Besides having performed numerous miracles in general, a miracle, the stick became a serpent, these are all minor, relatively speaking, minor signs. But he took Eden out of Mitzrayim. He plagued Paro. He forced Paro to let Eden out. He split the Yamsuf. And Eden went across, and the Mitzrayim this is real stuff. Not enough. That still leaves certain uncertainties, certain questions. Which means that it's conceivable that facing up to certain obstacles, certain questions, I may be doubting whether what I saw was real. Whether it's true. Maybe I saw it because I wanted to see it that way. Or maybe it was just a temporary thing, a vision. It leaves us vulnerable. The Yidden were destined, as we know now from history, to carry through their banner through all kinds of circumstances. The highest, the best circumstances, and the lowest and the most degrading and most testing circumstances. And the only thing that can survive the test of this type of time is something that is as clear and pure as sight itself. That cannot vary. This is why the Torah says, hey, you understand and you learn, it's all very fine and good. But ultimately you have to know, you have to get to the point where you see this clearly. Where it cannot be any other way. So, here we are, we come to Yeshiva, and we learn, and we acquire Baruch Hashem knowledge. We're all gifted, and we all, in a relatively short period of time, we acquire a lot of knowledge. We have to understand that all the knowledge and all the logic, while very, very good and very useful, this is not what is going to carry us through and to see us through our lives and the challenges of life. We have to have a clarity of knowledge, clarity of vision, like I see it. There is no alternative way of seeing the world. There is no alternative way of living in the world. This is what carries us through. With this, we are fully equipped. This is why, after all the faculty Hashem gave us, He also gave us the faculty of sight. Which is this greatest blessing, because this is what gives us a completely unwavering path and allows us to go through every kind of difficulty. Hopefully we don't have difficulties, but we have to be equipped. The reason we have to be equipped is that when we are in good times, we know what the reality is. We don't think that this is just a circumstance. I have good times because Hashem gave me good times. This is the reality of the world, the reality of life. To cut this a little bit short, because I want to also focus on another part of the Pasha. Later on in this Pasha, it says, Bonim atam Hashem Elokecha. You are children to Hashem. Lo is goydadu. You should not. Goydadu means you should not put scratches on yourselves, defame your body in any kind of way. Why? Because you're a holy nation to Hashem. In our day, we have such an outburst, so to speak, of all possibilities, that everything comes straight out and everything comes very clear and obvious. In the world of despondency, or the world of the meaningless world, the world where what's called the I don't care world, how does one want to express that he doesn't have respect for himself or respect for the human being? He puts on torn up dungarees, dirty shirt, his hair growing all over the place. And that shows that he really doesn't care about anybody. What does he care? He's looking for the truth. So he doesn't want to be misled and misguided by appearances, by fashion, by appearances. What's appearance? Appearance is nothing. I'm into art, I'm into music, I'm into whatever other things. This phenomenon here went through various gyrations in the past 4 or 5 decades, starting with the 60s, with the beatniks and all kinds of different periods, and everything left a certain mark on our thoughts. What the Torah is telling us over here is that for a Yid to take care of physique, of himself physically, is not a sign, is not coming from haughtiness or gaiva. And to wear tattered clothes is not a sign of humility. To wear tattered clothes is a sign of disrespect, of not understanding what a human being is. Nothing to do with humility. On the contrary, it's a sense of loss of recognition that there is anything spiritual in life. And the Torah tells us you have to remember, you are Hashem's children. You have a soul, like we discussed before, the faculty of the intellect and even the emotion. But certainly the intellect attests to the fact that we have a soul, a godly soul. We are Hashem's children. And we are obligated by the Torah to respect ourselves. I spoke one time, a long time ago, it's on the internet, not a sense of self-respect, but respect for the reality of the world. Respect for the one who created us, the one who created the whole world. To understand that the world is a meaningful place. And if he created the human being is meant to be a human being, not an animal. Now if a human being lowers himself and says, I don't want to walk on two, that's too haughty. I want to walk like an animal, I want to be equal with everything else in the world. That's humility. That's destruction that's denying of a godly presence in his creation. God created the whole world in 5.5 days. Up until Adam Rishon. And up until that time, before Adam Rishon was created, the world was a haphazard chaos. There was nothing meaningful in it. All the animals were roaming the fields to no end and to no purpose. The vegetation was going, everything was going, and there was no purpose in it. Like I mentioned one time, we discussed this. The apple tree, the apple wasn't an apple. What's the point of an apple? It's just a growth out of the tree. It's part of the tree. When did the apple become an apple? When Adam Rishon identified it as an apple. When Adam came. When Adam Rishon was created in the latter half of the sixth day, then Hashem said to Adam, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and conquer it and subdue it. It's interesting. The Gemara says, "Ba'asara ma'amoris nivra ha'olam." The world was created with 10 utterances. And the Gemara says that Breishis, even though it doesn't say Vayomer, but Breishis is also a minor. But if you count Breishis and all other Vayomer, in creation there is only 9. The 10th Vayomer is the one that says over here, that Hashem said to Adam, I gave the whole world to you, and you should conquer it. Huh?
What did that create?
What did that create? That's exactly what I'm saying. That created the world. There were a whole bunch of individual things. That's when the world was a real world. It assumed meaning. It had a purpose. It had a leader. And it had value. And it had definition. That's why Adam Rishon was the one who was entrusted later on to name all the creatures. Because he is the one who assigned to each creature in the world its task. Okay, you're a secretary, you're supposed to, take the garbage out, you're supposed to wash the windows. You gave everyone a task. Everybody had a place. That's the whole world. That is the center of the world. We, the Jewish people, way above that, way beyond that. We are not only in terms of making the world meaningful. We are to bring to the world God's presence Himself, not just to make a meaningful world or an orderly world. How much more so, and that's what the Torah clearly admonishes us and says, you are children of the Meibushin Himself. And this is not a question of gaiva, and it's not a question of humility. It's a question of recognizing that there is a creator, and your life here represents the presence of the creator. And otherwise, God forbid, you are denying the presence of the creator. It's not that you're denying your own greatness. You're denying the presence of the creator. So it's important to understand that especially a Yid, even a Goy Lahavdil, has to have respect for the human stature, because B'Tselem Elokim also is Odom, that B'Tselem, even a Goy was also created B'Tselem. It also represents a structure, a human structure, Tselem, form, a human form. The fact that it's been spoken one time that the head is on top and the feet on the bottom, not like animals with the head and the feet and the body at an even keel, an even level. The whole structure that the brain, the intellect, emotion, and the faculties and the lower faculties are in that structure, showing that the intellect is what guides everything. We spoke about this several times over the years, and I invite you, to find it in the archives. It's very, very important because of the world we live in, where everything is upside down. All values have been turned up on their head. We have to understand that humility is by accepting your responsibility of what you stand for and what you represent. If a person, the misguided humility is capable to come to a person and say, who are you to follow your intellect? Just follow your emotion. Just do what you like. What kind of thing is you follow your intellect? You understand. You are also a somebody. Just to go down to the ground and live like all the animals. And that's not humility. We have to assume our position, recognize our position, recognize our responsibility. And it starts from the very simple, small things. Do not abuse your body. Do not humiliate. Do not scratch. Do not put tattoos on your bodies. They're not meant to, your bodies are holy places, holy receptacles. And from this, we build up higher and higher to understand the value of Re'iyah, the value of the intellect, to understand that, yes, every individual person has the capability of seeing the world through and carry his mission in life. And not to be swayed or swerve any place else. And with this, as we always do, we're going to wish all of us here to succeed, to get to the point of Re'iyah, to have a clear vision of what we are here, and what we learn, what the Torah is about, what Yiddishkeit is about, and to derive full strength, to carry us through life. There is no greater gift and no greater blessing that one can have than to see a clear vision of what life is about and have the strength to carry it through. Say Shabbat Tzlochem, Brocha, Kol Tov.